Hello everyone, this is ARIRANG News live from our studio in Seoul. I'm Laah Hyun-kyung. Let's first take a look at the top stories at this hour. Renewed attention is being paid to North Korea issues in Washington's diplomatic policy agenda. This following the recent cyber attack on Sony Pictures, which the U.S. blames on North Korea. South Korea's nuclear power plant operator is still on high alert amid lingering concerns of a massive cyber attack. The investigation to identify the group of hackers responsible is still underway. And the newly revised tax law will make large firms pay more taxes starting next year if they don't spend 80% of their after-tax income on either investments, wage increases, or dividend payments. But first, we begin with the situation at Korea's nuclear power operator. Despite a threat by hackers, Christmas Day came and went without any major disruptions. The state-run agency is still on high alert, though. The hackers are not saying anything either and have been silent for the past 3 days. Kim Hyun-bin has more.
The government and nuclear plant operators remain on high alert, with a hacker possibly linked to North Korea threatening to disrupt operations at nuclear facilities in the nation. Suspicions about North Korea's involvement arose as prosecutors confirmed that the hacker had been using IP addresses in Shenyang, China, which is used as a base by an unknown number of North Korean hackers. But when asked about Pyongyang's possible involvement, the investigation team declined to confirm nor deny. Korea has requested judicial assistance from the Chinese government to help conduct an investigation into the IP addresses. China has not yet responded to the request. At the state-run Korea Hydro and Nuclear Power Corporation, no signs have been found of any system being compromised. But officials say they will remain in state of emergency until 8 a.m. local time on Saturday. The suspected hacker threatened to release over 100,000 pages of data on the nation's nuclear power plants and conduct a second wave of cyber attacks, unless the Kwori 1, Kwori 3, and Worsung 3 nuclear reactors were shut down for 3 months, starting on Christmas Day. Scores of documents, including blueprints and internal information on some facilities, have already been leaked on 5 different occasions since last Monday. The Korea Hydro and Nuclear Power Corporation manages a total of 23 local nuclear reactors, which supply around 30% of the country's electricity needs. Security Chief Kim Kwon-jin emphasized on Thursday that the suspected attacker or group does not have access to control systems for the nuclear facilities, which are separate from the external system that was hacked last week. Kim Hyun-bin, ARIRANG News.
And on to another hack attack, this time halfway across the globe. Sony's PlayStation network was down again on Christmas Day. The wide speculation is that the group of hackers responsible for the disruption was not happy about Sony's decision to screen the movie The Interview in theaters and online. For the details, here's Connie Lee.
Sony has received an unwanted Christmas present from hackers. The company's PlayStation network is down again, with visitors to the site saying that the page is under scheduled maintenance. This follows a 6-hour outage the day before on Christmas Eve and an outage back in November. The latest hacking was done by the same anonymous hacker group Lizard Squad, who claimed responsibility for the other hacks. These hackers had previously threatened a cyber attack on Christmas Day for Sony's release of the film The Interview. Microsoft's Xbox Live site, which has the film for sale and rent on demand, is also down after an attack by the same hacker group. Microsoft and Sony have yet to comment on the hack, but they say they are working to fix the issues. Nevertheless, it was on with the show, with the North Korea-based comedy film that sparked all the cyber attacks. The Interview was released in 320 U.S. theaters on midnight Christmas Day, with fans generally enjoying the film, maybe more so because of the controversy surrounding it.
This is a film I probably would not have come to see, but because of the controversy, I thought I would come out tonight to stand up for freedom of speech.
It's funny, but it's definitely nothing that could topple a monarchy.
The Interview was originally pulled from all theaters by Sony because of threats of violence against cinemas and moviegoers. And the film is now available online through video platforms like Google Play and YouTube Movies and on its dedicated website, seetheinterview.com. Connie Lee, ARIRANG News.
Well, North Korea, meanwhile, is experiencing internet disruptions as well, and this has been happening for the past 4 days now. The regime's official news agency website went down at 1 a.m. Friday, Korea time, and stayed that way for about the next 7 hours. The site is back up now, but the contents are still loading slowly. North Korea's propaganda site has also experienced disruptions over the past few days and is currently completely down. Internet services in the north went out altogether on Tuesday. The exact cause remains unclear. Now, following the hack attack on Sony Pictures, reports coming out of Capitol Hill says North Korea is back on top of America's policy agenda. Washington believes the attack was initiated by Pyongyang, and with that, possible retribution measures, including putting more sanctions on the regime, are being thoroughly looked at. For more, here's Connie Kim.
The U.S. is expected to clamp down on North Korea in light of the recent cyber attack against Sony. Diplomatic sources in Washington say the Senate and the House of Representatives are seeking to pass a bill that will strengthen sanctions against the regime. Two separate bills that would have done that were recently scrapped as the current session of Congress expires next week. But lawmakers Ed Royce and Robert Menendez, who are behind these legislation, are expected to make a new push next year. The legislation is expected to include elements from previous set of U.S. sanctions imposed on North Korea in 2005 that limit North Korea's access to international financial institutions. The incoming chairman of U.S. Senate Committee on Foreign Relations is reportedly on board with the move. Pyongyang has emerged as a hot topic in Washington due to the international spotlight on the North's abysmal human rights record. The UN Security Council added the North Korean human rights issue to its agenda earlier this month. The U.S. Congress for the first time passed a bill calling for probe into North Korea's political prison camps in December. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
South Korea, the United States, and Japan will sign a memorandum of understanding on Monday that has North Korea in mind. South Korea's defense ministry says the agreement will alter the way information is shared between the three countries. Right now, Seoul and Tokyo only exchange their defense information with Washington, but the MOU will enable Korea and Japan to share intelligence directly with one another. The agreement only pertains to North Korea's missile and nuclear threats. Now, although it's based on just one man's observation, some North Korea watchers say the regime might be ready for fresh inter-Korean dialogue. This after a former South Korean official said Pyongyang's top policymaker acknowledged South Korea's sincerity toward improving bilateral ties. ARIRANG's Unification Ministry correspondent Hwang Sung-hee has our next story.
North Korea's official in charge of South Korean affairs says he understands President Park Geun-hye's sincerity about improving inter-Korean ties. Former Culture Minister Kim Sang-jae told the Yonhap news agency that he passed on the South Korean leader's thoughts to Kim Young-gun when they met at the Kaesong Industrial Complex on Wednesday. In response, the North Korean official said he understands. He also showed a willingness to return to the negotiating table.
He said issues like the Mount Kumgang tours, the May 24 sanctions, and reunions for war-separated families can open up small roads that lead to bigger ones, eventually leading to peaceful improvements in South-North relations.
If true, it would mark a dramatic shift in Pyongyang's attitude. The regime had dismissed any improvement in relations under Seoul's current policies, which North Korea deems hostile. Some caution about the comments being blown out of proportion since they were not made in a high-level meeting. But others are paying close attention to the timing. They say it could signal Pyongyang's willingness to re-engage depending on Seoul's next moves, and add that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un could extend an olive branch to the south in his New Year's speech. Hwang Sang-hee, ARIRANG News.
In the year 2012 for Korea was at its record high.
All of the day's important events close to home and around the world. Join Laah Hyun-kyung live from Seoul.
Shopping market thinks the true meaning of creation shines through. Come next year, large companies in Korea will be pressed to start spending their large cash reserves. If 80% of their after-tax income is not spent on either paying employees, shareholders, or on investments, they will face an additional tax. For this story, here's Hwang Ji-hye.
The Korean government has finalized its tax scheme to encourage conglomerates to play a greater role in bolstering domestic demand. The finance ministry says that from next year, local manufacturers with equity capital of more than 50 billion won, or roughly $45 million, will have to spend 80% of their earnings after taxes on investments, raising wages, or paying out dividends. Otherwise, the companies will have to pay a 10% tax for the portion that falls short of the 80% mark. But companies in the service sector that spend less on facilities investment will only have to spend 30% of their after-tax income on wage and dividend payments. The new tax scheme is a temporary plan that will apply to business results for 2015 through 2017. It's aimed at boosting investment and revitalizing sluggish domestic demand during the current Park Geun-hye administration. The government expects more than 3,000 large companies and their sister companies to be affected by the plan. The plan comes as criticism mounts over large companies sitting on excessive cash reserves. Korean companies are notorious for paying out some of the lowest dividends in the world. Hwang Ji-hye, ARIRANG News.
Well, in the meantime, the government's plan to make religious groups pay taxes on their earnings has been postponed by 1 year to 2016. But given the time frame, some worry that the plan will never materialize. Our Park Ji-won explains.
The Korean government's attempt to impose tax on the earnings of clergy members will be delayed for 1 more year. The government was originally scheduled to start levying taxes on the nation's clergy members, like priests and monks, from the start of next year, which is less than a week away. But the finance ministry now says a tax on clergy earnings will start from January 2016. The ruling Sony party had been asking for an even longer delay, reflecting demands made by some Protestant ministers. The ministry said it has decided to delay its plans for 1 more year only out of consideration that some religious groups are willing to voluntarily pay tax.
We want to pay tax as we live a life of honorary poverty and hope. We'll attempt to restore the essence of the clergy members.
The Catholic Church in Korea has already been paying income tax voluntarily since 1994, and Buddhist sectors in the nation are supporting the taxation. However, considering local elections are locked in for 2016 and a presidential election is set for the following year, some are concerned the January 2016 start date could be pushed back. Members of the clergy in Korea have enjoyed tax-exempt status since 1948. Park Ji-won, ARIRANG News.
Contrary to the government's pledge to recruit employees regardless of their educational background, it seems that it's going to be tougher for high school graduates to find jobs at government offices next year. Data released by the Finance Ministry shows that the number of jobs that will be offered to high school graduates in 2015 stands at slightly over 1,700. That's 11% lower than this year and merely 10% of the total number of recruits by government offices for next year. Experts attribute the decline to the Park Geun-hye administration's focus on increasing part-time positions with flexible working hours. Commercial banks in Korea are planning to reduce their number of branches. The prolonged low interest rate and widespread use of mobile and online banking services have made the downsizing even more inevitable. Lee Ji-yoon reports.
The recent launch of Daum Kakao's mobile money transfer service has prompted other tech firms to enter the race, and that spells potential trouble for the local banking sector. Prolonged low interest rates have made the situation even worse, with banks turning in some of their lowest performances in the recent years. 10% of branches are experiencing deficits, while banks' overall net profit has shrunk to 1/3 what it was 6 years ago. Around 90% of users who transfer money and check their balances use either mobile and online banking services or go to the automated teller machines rather than visit the bank in person. As this has been the case, banks have been forced to shut down more of their branches. Nonghyab is phasing out 34 branches, Kookmin 18, and Shinhan 6.
The downsizing or merger of branches has become an unavoidable solution. Banks need to strategize their profit system or seek other options like refining their banking services.
With the trend expected to continue for the time being, experts predict a huge wave of restructuring to hit the local banking sector next year. They warn that the closing of bank branches may be just the tip of an iceberg for what's to come. Lee Ji-yoon, ARIRANG News.
Catching a cab during the late night hours can be challenging in Seoul, especially this time of the year. The Seoul Metropolitan Government rolled out a new website today that should make people's lives a bit easier. The site provides real-time information on the location of taxis in the capital and whether they are empty. The city hopes the information will be used by taxi drivers to spread out and cover more of the capital while guiding passengers to areas where cabs are available. The information is available on data.seoul.go.kr. There's also a smartphone app provided by Daum Kakao that relays the same data. The Sony Pictures movie The Interview was released in the U.S. on Christmas Day after all, though in small limited screens. And here in Korea, a couple of local films are ending the year on a high note. Here to guide us through the latest development is our film critic, Piers Conran. Good afternoon, Piers.
Good afternoon to you.
So we ended last week wondering if we will ever get a chance to see the movie The Interview, but it looks like we got the answer sooner than expected.
Absolutely. Obviously, the film was canceled last week, and there's been a big kind of a turnaround now that the film was indeed released yesterday on screens in America, albeit in a much smaller rate than was originally planned. As with any mainstream release, Sony Pictures were looking to throw out the film at about 3,000 theaters, and now the number is about 300 because none of the major chains will show the film. And what actually happened was a smaller group of art houses came together, and so we're looking at about 300 screens are showing the film at the moment.
And it's also available online as well, right?
That's correct, yeah. It's been released on YouTube, on Google Play, and there's even a dedicated website called, I think it's seetheinterview.com.
Right. So what prompted Sony's sudden change of heart, in your opinion?
Well, I think it's a few things. There was a big kind of public backlash about this happening. A lot of the word freedom of expression, freedom of speech, these have been bandied around quite a lot. One of the big turning points was a few days ago when President Barack Obama made a statement saying that he was disappointed that Sony had canceled the film. Now, the CEO of Sony, Michael Linton, kind of shot back saying, well, the distributors or the exhibitors wouldn't show the film, so we were kind of compelled to do that. But then, of course, the exhibitors weren't very happy that he had said that, so ultimately the film was released. Well, what happened was this group called Art House Convergence, which is a group of these smaller chains and art house theaters, they made a petition, and so they petitioned Sony. And one of the leading voices of that was the CEO of Alamo Drafthouse, a company I mentioned last week. This guy called Tim League, who was really pushing for this. And so it was a successful endeavor on their part. So the film is now available, albeit in a limited format.
So what is the current status of the film's release right now? You did go over it briefly, but...
Yeah, so it's on 300 screens, just over 300, and that may change over time. After, if nothing happens, basically in the first week, maybe the larger chains will jump on board, but that remains to be seen. But the film is available for anyone in North America. It's only in North America at this point to view online as well. But those 300 cities, or 300 theaters do cover most major cities, so there's a very good chance people seeing it. And there have been a lot of sellouts reported. Numbers are starting to come in. I'm hearing talk of 3 to 4 million for the 4-day Christmas weekend, which for 300 screens is certainly a good number. And also keeping in mind that those screens are smaller than your usual multiplex screens.
Right. And we did say that the film is available online. So do you still have to pay for the movie though?
Yes. Okay. There was talk. There was a rumor initially that they were going to put it online for free, but that didn't pan out. And that makes sense. It's available for, I believe it's $5.99 for the normal version. This is in dollars, and the HD version is $14.99. And this is kind of a very unique case because normally major exhibitors insist that if they book a film, it cannot be made available on any other platform for at least 3 months.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah, and so there's different windows. There's maybe 3 months for VOD, then maybe 6 months for a DVD or Blu-ray release. However, the market is changing a lot, and a lot of smaller distributors and exhibitors are experimenting with new things. So, for instance, Snowpiercer is a good example, as it was released this summer in America, but after 2 weeks in theaters, it was already made available on VOD, and it turned out to be a big hit on VOD, although some people were still not happy that it wasn't thrown out in more theaters. But so this is kind of in a sense, is kind of a lucky experiment as well, because we'll see what can happen if you have a major film released at the same time in theaters and on VOD, and kind of see what figures it gets and how those compare. So we'll see how that goes.
Okay, and on to the question that I'm most curious about. So what are people saying about the film, those who have watched it in theaters or online?
Well, the reaction has been mixed. I mean, the critical response was already mixed going in. Some people really enjoyed it. A lot of people just thought it was very silly, and some people were almost a little bit angry about it. And this has been kind of reflected by the public as well. I mean, this is a very unique case of talking about a film, because you're not necessarily judging it on its own merits, because there's a much larger issue at play. And one of those issues is the representation of North Korea. And people feel that people are saying, well, there's this kind of freedom of speech and expression. We're being patriots by going to see this film. At the same time, people are saying, well, this movie doesn't actually put North Korea in a proper light, and it's kind of it's skirting the issues, and it's not really, it's just not serious. And of course, it's a comedy. It's not supposed to be very serious.
Not at all.
But so a lot of people are kind of iffy about it. And some people say, well, this is not a patriotic thing. You shouldn't be going to see the film for that reason. So everyone has their own opinion, which they're entitled to, but it'll be curious to see how the large reaction, the consensus develops over time.
If you get a chance to see it, you will have to share it with us about what you thought about the film. Now, let's shift our focus back here in the nation. The local film industry did break the 100 million admission mark this year. So how significant is that milestone?
Well, it's a huge number, and that represents 2 tickets for every citizen to having seen a Korean film. So it just shows how healthy the industry still is locally. That being said, this is the 3rd year on the trot that the local industry has breached that mark, and 3rd time overall as well. But it was much slower than the last 2 years. In 2012, it was reached a month earlier. Last year it was reached 2 months earlier. So we're a bit behind schedule this time. But Hollywood has been very dominant this year, and actually, at the moment, the Korean market share is just below the 50% mark. But I have a feeling it'll go just over before the end of the year, because there are some big films doing well at the moment.
Right, and we cannot not talk about My Love Don't Cross That River. That is breaking just records. It sold 3 million tickets so far, a new record set by a documentary film.
It's a new record set by any independent film, actually, and it had 260,000 admissions yesterday, so we can still expect it to go much further. And also, speaking of records, Interstellar finally crossed 10 million yesterday as well. So it's the 13th film to do that, and the 3rd this year. That's the first time we've had 3 films cross the mark in a year.
Okay, well, all the films that we are going to have at the end of the year, and people who haven't watched the film yet will have a chance to go. We'll still have a couple of days left, right? All right,
plenty of time.
Of the year, I mean, left. Thank you very much, Pierce, for coming in today.
My pleasure.
Happy Friday and good afternoon. I'm Michelle Park here with the latest weather forecast. We started off our day with a cold morning and a low of -7 degrees here in Seoul. Now it's expected to rise above the freezing point this afternoon, but strong winds will keep it feeling quite chilly. And we are looking at a warm up over the weekend, though with temperatures returning to the seasonal averages. Now today's highs will range between 3 and 8 degrees Celsius here in the nation, with clear skies due to the influence of high pressure trough. And looking ahead to a bit over the weekend, it will be warmer, but on Monday we are expecting snow or rain here in the central region, while nationwide precipitation is also in the forecast on Wednesday, along with some cooler temperatures. Now for today's readings, Seoul will peak to 3 this afternoon, meanwhile the southern cities such as Gwangju and Busan will be a bit higher at 6 and 7 degrees. And we see Jeju Island getting up to 8, while Dokdo hits 4, while Mangkeungang is below freezing at -4 degrees. Well, that's all for now, Michelle Park, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
And that brings us to the end of our newscast. From me and the rest of the team, thanks for watching. More news coming up at 4 p.m. Korea time.